The first sign that something was wrong wasn't the champagne on the patio or even my mother's overly bright smile. It was the silence from Grandma Evelyn. I had been away for 3 months on a work assignment overseas, and I expected the usual chaos when I returned home. My father bragging about business plans that never materialized. My mother rearranging furniture to refresh the energy, and Grandma sitting in her favorite chair, correcting everyone with gentle sarcasm. But when I stepped through the front door that evening, the house felt different, too polished, too staged. Like a stage set waiting for actors to perform a script already written. Mom rushed toward me first, arms open wide as if we hadn't spoken in weeks instead of daily video calls. "Emma, you're just in time," she said, squeezing me tightly. Her perfume was stronger than I remembered. "We have wonderful news." Dad appeared behind her, holding a glass of champagne he clearly didn't need at 5 in the afternoon. "Perfect timing," he added with a grin that looked almost rehearsed. "You're going to want to hear this." Something about the way they stood too close together, too coordinated, made my stomach tighten. "Where's Grandma?" I asked immediately. Mom hesitated half a second too long. "Oh, she's here," she said quickly, relaxing. That didn't sound right. Grandma Evelyn never just relaxed when there were people around. She liked to be part of everything, even if she only sat quietly and observed. She called it keeping an eye on the world. I pushed past them and stepped into the living room. That's when I saw her. Grandma was sitting in her old wooden rocking chair near the window. The afternoon light spilled across her silver hair, making it glow softly. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap. She wasn't smiling. That alone made my chest tighten. Grandma always smiled at me. Even on bad days, even when her knees hurt or the garden needed work or the electricity went out. She always had that calm, knowing warmth in her expression. But now she just watched me, quiet, observing, almost as if she were waiting. "Grandma," I said gently, walking toward her. Her eyes softened the moment she saw me, but the smile that followed didn't reach them. "Emma," she said warmly, "you've come back." I knelt beside her chair. "What's going on?" "Mom and Dad are acting weird." Before she could answer, my mother's voice rang out from behind us. "Emma, come here, darling. We need to tell you something important." Reluctantly, I stood up and turned around. Mom and Dad were standing near the dining table. On it were glasses, papers, and a folder I didn't recognize. Everything about the scene felt deliberate, staged like a celebration that had been planned in advance. Dad lifted his glass. "We've sold Grandma's house." For a moment, I thought I hadn't heard correctly. "What did you say?" Mom smiled brightly, almost proudly. "The house, it's done. Signed, sealed, everything." The room seemed to tilt slightly. I turned slowly back toward Grandma. Her expression remained unchanged, calm, almost too calm. "Grandma," I whispered, "is that true?" She studied me for a long moment before answering. "Your parents believe it is," she said softly. That answer didn't make sense. Dad laughed lightly, as if this was all a pleasant surprise party. "She agreed, Emma. Said she didn't want to deal with the upkeep anymore. Honestly, it was her idea in the end." That was a lie. I knew it instantly. Grandma's house wasn't just property. It was her entire life. Every brick had a memory attached to it. She had told me 100 times she would rather lose everything than leave that house unwillingly. Mom must have seen my expression because she quickly added, "It's actually a relief. We've been worrying about her managing it alone. This way, everything is taken care of." Taken care of. They said it like they were doing her a favor, like they were rescuing her from something she never asked to be saved from. I turned back to Grandma again. Her hands were still folded neatly in her lap, but now I noticed something else. Her fingers were gently tapping, slow, controlled, not nervous, thoughtful, calculated. "Did you sign anything?" I asked her quietly. She tilted her head slightly, as if considering the question in a deeper way than it deserved. "Paperwork," she said at last. "So many papers these days." My father chuckled. It was all handled properly. Lawyer approved everything. Something inside me twisted sharply. Grandma finally looked directly at me, and for a split second, I saw something in her eyes that made my breath catch. Not confusion, not regret, awareness. She knew something, and she wasn't telling. The air in the room felt heavier suddenly, like the walls had moved closer without anyone noticing. Mom clapped her hands together, breaking the tension. "Well, we should celebrate. This is a big win for the family. A win." They were celebrating selling the one place Grandma had ever truly called home. I looked back at her again. This time she gave me the faintest nod, almost invisible, almost like a signal, and in that moment I realized something that sent a chill down my spine. Grandma wasn't confused. She wasn't defeated. She was watching them, waiting. And somehow, she already knew how this would end. Months before I ever walked back into that house and saw champagne on the patio, something had already begun to shift inside Grandma Evelyn's world. It didn't start with anger. It started with listening. Grandma always said people reveal their true selves when they think no one is paying attention. So she paid attention more than anyone realized. It began one late afternoon when she was upstairs folding laundry. The house was quiet except for the faint sound of my parents talking in the kitchen below. Their voices carried easily through the old wooden floorboards. At first, it was normal family noise, complaints about bills, arguments about money, the usual tension that had followed my parents for years. Then Grandma heard her son's voice sharpen. "If we can get her to sign, it solves everything." A pause. Then my mother's voice, lower but more excited. "She trusts us, especially after I told her we'd help manage things." Grandma stopped folding. Her hands froze mid-motion. "She's stubborn." My father continued, "But she's old. We can push her into it." "Not push," my mother corrected. "Guide her. Make her think it's her idea." A soft laugh followed. That laugh was what changed everything. Not the plan itself, not even the betrayal forming underneath it. It was the ease with which they spoke. Like the house upstairs didn't belong to the woman listening. Like she was already a problem to be solved rather than a person to be respected. Grandma quietly finished folding the towel in her hands. Then she walked back into her bedroom and closed the door without a sound. No confrontation, no shouting, just silence, because Evelyn Harper understood something most people didn't. Greed always speaks twice, once in confidence and once in carelessness. That night, she made her first phone call. Her lawyer, Mr. Whittaker, answered on the second ring. "I need to make some changes," she said calmly. "What kind of changes?" "The kind that prevent my son from making a very expensive mistake." There was a pause on the other end. "Then," Mr. Whittaker said, "I assume this is about Maple Lane." Grandma smiled faintly. "It seems I am predictable." By the end of the week, she had rewritten everything, legally, carefully, and without a single alert sent to anyone in the household. The house, every brick, every window, every inch of land her late husband had built their life around, was transferred into a private, irrevocable trust. But not just any trust, one designed to appear unchanged on the surface while quietly removing all control from anyone trying to manipulate her. And the beneficiary, me, Emma, her granddaughter, the only person who ever listened without asking for anything in return. But Grandma didn't stop there. She knew her son and daughter-in-law too well. They would not simply accept confusion or resistance. They would push harder, so she created something for them too, decoy documents, papers that looked official, signatures that looked valid, a carefully constructed illusion of compliance that would satisfy their impatience while hiding the truth in plain sight. She even placed them in a folder on purpose, leaving it somewhere she knew they would find it, on the kitchen counter, where curiosity always won. After that, she waited and watched. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal. It was pretending not to see it forming. When my mother later approached her with helpful conversations about managing the house, Grandma played her role perfectly. "Oh, I don't understand these things anymore," she would say gently, adjusting her glasses. "You know best, dear." Inside, she was memorizing every word, every assumption, every slip of confidence. She noticed how my father started walking through the house differently, like he was already measuring furniture for removal. She noticed how my mother stopped referring to it as Grandma's house and started calling it the property. Small changes, dangerous changes, but she said nothing, not yet, because Evelyn believed in timing more than emotion. One evening, she overheard them again, this time discussing buyers. "They're interested," my mother said excitedly. "We could finalize within weeks." Grandma stood in the hallway, just out of sight, listening as her home was turned into a transaction. She felt no panic, only clarity. That night, she made tea and sat alone at the kitchen table, looking around at the life she had built over decades. Every scratch on the wood floor, every photo on the wall, every rose bush outside that had survived winters harsher than most people. They thought she was losing it. They thought she was becoming fragile. But as she sipped her tea, she felt something else entirely. Control, because they had made a mistake already. They had assumed she was unaware, and that assumption was the beginning of their downfall. Before going to bed, she opened her notebook and wrote one line in neat cursive: "Let them believe they are winning." She closed the book, turned off the light, and for the first time in weeks, smiled in the dark. The morning of the buyer's arrival felt like a performance my parents had been rehearsing for weeks. Everything in the house had been rearranged to look presentable, as my mother called it. Curtains were tied back in identical bows. Fresh flowers sat on every surface, and even the air smelled faintly of expensive citrus spray meant to disguise the age of the wooden walls. To anyone passing by, it would have looked like a proud family handing over a cherished home to new owners. But to me, it felt wrong, too perfect, too rehearsed. Grandma Evelyn sat in her rocking chair near the front window, as she always did. Her posture was straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She had been unusually quiet since my return, watching everything with a calmness that unsettled me more each day. Mom bustled around her like she wasn't even there. "Emma, help me with the glasses," she said briskly, placing champagne flutes on a tray. "We want everything to look celebratory." "Celebratory for what?" I muttered. Dad overheard and laughed. "For a new beginning, of course. A new beginning for them, maybe. But every time I looked at Grandma, I couldn't shake the feeling that she already knew something none of us did. At exactly 11 in the morning, the sound of engines broke the silence outside. 2 cars pulled into the driveway. One sleek black sedan, one moving truck. Mom immediately straightened her dress, smoothing invisible wrinkles. "They're here," she whispered excitedly. Dad picked up a ring of keys and jingled them like a prize. "Let's make this official." The front door opened, a couple stepped out of the black sedan, wealthy, well-dressed, clearly eager. Behind them came a lawyer holding a briefcase. The buyers smiled politely, looking around the property like it was already theirs. Mom stepped forward, beaming. "Welcome. You're going to love it here. This house has so much charm." Dad followed, already leading them toward the front steps. Everything's been prepared. Ownership transfer is complete, no delays. I felt my stomach tighten. Grandma, I whispered, turning toward her. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she kept watching the scene unfold, her eyes steady and unreadable. Then she said quietly, "Watch carefully, Emma." That was all. Before I could ask what she meant, the sound of another engine interrupted the moment. A second black car pulled up behind the moving truck. This one I didn't recognize. The driver stepped out first, then opened the back door. A man in a tailored suit emerged, carrying a leather briefcase. Mr. Whittaker, Grandma's lawyer. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Dad's smile faltered. Mom's hand froze midair. "What is he doing here?" my father demanded sharply. Mr. Whittaker walked calmly up the driveway, completely unfazed by the growing tension. "I'm here to clarify a legal matter," he said evenly. Mom laughed nervously. "There's nothing to clarify. The house is sold." Mr. Whittaker raised an eyebrow. "Is it?" He opened his briefcase. The crowd of neighbors that had gathered nearby fell silent. Even the buyers looked uncertain now. Mr. Whittaker removed a stack of documents. According to official records filed 7 months ago, this property was transferred into the Evelyn Harper Family Trust. Dad scoffed. "That's impossible. She never told us anything about that." Grandma finally stood up, slowly, deliberately. The rocking chair creaked behind her as she stepped forward, her presence suddenly filling the space in a way I had never seen before. "I didn't feel the need to announce it," she said calmly. Mom's face tightened. "What is this supposed to mean?" Grandma turned her gaze toward her son. "It means," she said softly, "that you were never in control of anything you thought you were." Mr. Whittaker continued, his voice professional and precise. "The legal owner of this property is now the trust. The sole beneficiary is Miss Emma Harper." Silence. A heavy, crushing silence. I felt my breath catch. "What?" I whispered. Mom's face drained of color. "That's not possible," she snapped. "She signed documents. We have proof." Mr. Whittaker nodded slightly. "You have copies of documents designed to appear valid. However, they are not legally binding." The buyers stepped back slowly, confusion turning into anger. "We were told this was a completed sale," one of them said sharply. "It was not," Mr. Whittaker replied. Dad's hands trembled. "This is fraud," he muttered. "She tricked us." At that, Grandma gave a quiet, almost amused exhale. "No," she said gently, "you tricked yourselves. I simply made sure you had the opportunity." The words landed harder than any accusation. Mom turned toward her, voice rising. "You set us up." Grandma met her eyes without blinking. "I listened," she said. "There is a difference." The buyers began arguing with their lawyer. Phones were pulled out, calls were made. Voices overlapped in panic. And through it all, Grandma stood perfectly still, unshaken, watching as the illusion my parents had built collapsed in real time. For the first time since I returned home, I understood what she had meant when she told me, "Everything happens exactly when it should." The moment the truth settled into the air, it didn't explode. All at once it unraveled, slowly at first, like a thread pulled loose from fabric that had been stitched together too tightly. Then all at once, everything came apart. My mother was the first to break. "This is insane," she snapped, turning to Mr. Whittaker with shaking hands. "We handled everything properly. We had documents. We had signatures." Dad stepped forward, his voice rising. She agreed to this. She was fully aware. But no one was listening to them anymore. The buyers were already on the phone with their legal team, pacing near the driveway, faces tight with anger and disbelief. The moving truck driver had shut off his engine and was now leaning against the vehicle. Watching the chaos like it was a show he hadn't paid for. Neighbors whispered behind fences. Phones recorded. Wordless judgment spread faster than any explanation could contain it. And in the center of it all stood Grandma Evelyn, calm, still, unshaken. She looked almost smaller than the storm around her, but somehow she was the only one who felt steady. Mom pointed at her suddenly, voice cracking. "You did this on purpose." Grandma didn't flinch. "Yes," she said simply. That single word landed harder than all the shouting combined. Dad froze. "You manipulated us," he said slowly, as if trying to understand it rather than accept it. Grandma tilted her head slightly. "I protected what was mine." She corrected gently. "There is a difference, Mr." Whitaker stepped forward again, adjusting his glasses. To clarify, he said professionally, no illegal sale occurred. Therefore, no ownership transfer is valid. Any funds exchanged will be returned through the proper legal channels, and any attempted enforcement of the sale would be considered fraudulent misrepresentation. The word fraudulent made my mother flinch. For the first time, her confident mask cracked completely. "This is my house too," Dad shouted suddenly, pointing at the property like that alone made it true. "I'm her son." Grandma finally turned to look at him fully, and the disappointment in her eyes was sharper than anger. "You are my son," she said quietly. "That is why I waited so long before acting." The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the wind seemed to pause. I stood there frozen, trying to process everything happening at once. The house, the betrayal, the legal documents, Grandma's calm voice cutting through all of it like she had known this ending from the beginning. Mom sank onto the edge of the porch step, suddenly drained of all her earlier pride. "This can't be happening," she whispered. "We already planned everything." Grandma looked at her for a long moment. "I know," she said softly. That was the problem. Those words didn't just answer the situation, they defined it. My parents hadn't just been stopped. They had been outplayed from the very beginning. The buyers, frustrated and furious, finally returned to their car after receiving confirmation from their legal team. The deal was dead. The house was not for sale. The money they had prepared to transfer would never move. One of them shouted something about compensation as they drove away. Tires crunching against gravel. But Grandma didn't react. She simply watched them leave, as if watching one more chapter close. When the driveway finally emptied, the noise didn't disappear immediately. It lingered in fragments, heated whispers, distant phone calls, the hum of confusion settling into humiliation. Then slowly, even that faded. Only the four of us remained outside. My parents stood side by side now, not in unity, but in collapse. Dad looked older suddenly, like something inside him had given out. Mom avoided everyone's eyes, and Grandma returned to her rocking chair. She sat down carefully, smoothing her dress, as if the world hadn't just shifted beneath our feet. Then she looked at me, and her expression softened. "Come here, Emma," she said gently. I walked over slowly, still stunned. She took my hand. "I didn't do this for revenge," she said quietly, so only I could hear. "I did it so there would still be something left to protect." My throat tightened. "You gave it to me," I whispered. She nodded. "Because you never tried to take it from me." Behind us, my mother let out a broken sound, half anger, half grief. "You ruined us," she said weakly. Grandma didn't even turn around. "No," she replied calmly. "Your choices did that." The finality of it was absolute. There was no argument left to win, no excuse left to build, only consequences. As the sun began to lower behind the oak trees, casting long golden light across the porch, Grandma leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes for a moment. Peaceful, almost content, and in that quiet, I finally understood what she had been doing all along. She hadn't been waiting for revenge. She had been waiting for truth to finish revealing itself.